Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are unpacking one of the most gripping, genuinely terrifying survival thrillers of our modern era. We're looking at an event that completely captivated the entire globe, a rescue that tested the absolute limits of human endurance, international cooperation, and sheer undeniable courage. It's a story where nature laid down a seemingly unbeatable trap, and humanity responded with an unprecedented display of ingenuity. Okay, let's dive into this. Picture this. It's June 23, 2018. 12 boys from the Wild Boars junior soccer team, ranging in age from just 11 to 16, along with their 25-year-old assistant coach, decide to explore the Tham Luang cave complex in Thailand right after practice. It's just a fun adventure to celebrate a birthday. But deep inside, completely unbeknownst to them, a freak monsoon downpour begins. When the parents finally realize their kids haven't come home, they rush straight to the cave, and all they find are abandoned bicycles, backpacks, and cleats just sitting there at the entrance, while the cave itself is rapidly disappearing under these raging, muddy floodwaters. Now, initially, authorities actually thought about just leaving the boys in the cave for 4 to 6 months. I know, it sounds crazy, but the idea was to wait until the monsoon season ended and the waters receded. But here's the terrifying reality of the ticking clock they were actually facing. When rescue teams finally managed to measure the air quality inside the cave, oxygen levels had plummeted to a deadly 15%. To put that into perspective, normal atmospheric oxygen is about 21%. At 15%, humans face severe hypoxia. Basically, your body shuts down. Leaving them inside for months wasn't some cautious backup plan, it was literally a guaranteed death sentence. Let's just walk through the agonizing timeline of those initial days. For almost a week and a half, these boys were trapped about 4 kilometers deep inside the mountain. Try to imagine that for a second. Total, absolute darkness. Pitch black. No concept of day or night whatsoever, just surrounded by the terrifying, echoing sound of rushing water. By day 4, local rescue attempts were failing completely against the rising floods. Desperation was really setting in. But finally, on day 9, the rain paused. And then, on day 10, 2 British cave divers miraculously surfaced in a tiny air pocket to find all 13 members alive. Finding them alive, it was an absolute miracle that left the whole world asking the exact same question. How on earth did a group of young kids survive for 10 days without food in the freezing dark? Well, the answer lies with their 25-year-old assistant coach, Ikapol Chantawong. See, before he was a soccer coach, Ikapol had spent nearly a decade living as a Buddhist monk. And in the most desperate, terrifying moment of their entire lives, his unique background became the quiet, steadfast anchor that kept 12 children tethered to reality. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how they made it through. Coach Ikapol implemented these incredible, life-saving survival techniques. He actually taught the terrified boys how to meditate, keeping their minds calm to prevent panic. This is absolutely crucial because panicking spikes your heart rate and burns through your oxygen way faster. He told them to practice complete stillness to conserve their extremely limited energy and that precious air. And to survive without food, he showed them how to collect and drink only the clean water dripping directly from the limestone roof of the cave, completely avoiding the toxic, muddy floodwater swirling below them. But look, once they were found, the real nightmare began. Getting them out. Now, the Thai Navy SEALs are incredibly elite, right? But their training is strictly an open sea diving. Cave diving is a fundamentally different, completely horrifying reality. We are talking about zero visibility, where you literally cannot see your own hand moving right in front of your face. We're talking about freezing, muddy water. And we're talking about squeezing through jagged rock gaps that are as narrow as 2 feet wide, all while wearing bulky diving equipment. So to even give the divers a fighting chance at making it through, an astronomical engineering effort had to happen on the outside. Teams were furiously pumping out 10,000 liters of water every single hour just to fight the monsoon. 10,000 liters, but it was basically a losing battle. The mountain was acting like a giant sponge, and more rain was just funneling right back into the cave system way faster than they could physically pump it out. And this is where the sheer scale of the operation becomes truly awe-inspiring. What started as a local emergency transformed into this massive, unprecedented international coalition. 17 different countries basically dropped their borders to help. The US sent in rescue specialists, Britain and Australia sent their absolute top cave divers, and India provided this crucial technical support for the massive water pumps. We are talking about an army here. 10,000 volunteers, 2,000 soldiers, and over 100 of the world's most elite cave divers, all working together as a single unit. But the extreme peril of this environment became painfully, tragically real on July 6th. Former Thai Navy SEAL Saman Gunan, a highly fit, incredibly experienced and healthy diver, tragically ran out of oxygen and lost his life while simply trying to deliver air tanks along the route. His death sent a massive shockwave through the entire camp. It was a sobering, heartbreaking reality check. I mean, if an elite military diver can survive the journey, what chance did 13 starving, exhausted children have? It was right at this devastating low point that Australian cave diving expert and Dr. Richard Harris arrived on the scene. Upon evaluating the situation and seeing the boys' deteriorating conditions, his initial assessment of a diving extraction was incredibly bleak. He flat out said, survival chances are near zero. There was no safe way to do this, none. There was only one unprecedented, highly controversial medical gamble left on the table. So, what was that gamble? Total sedation. And you might be wondering why. Why knock them out? Well, because the geography of the cave was this claustrophobic, underwater labyrinth. If you take a starving, non-swimming child and plunge them into freezing, pitch-black water for hours on end, they will inevitably panic. It's human nature. And a panicking child underwater wouldn't just drown themselves, they would thrash around, dislodge their equipment, and very likely kill the rescue diver attached to them. They absolutely had to be completely unconscious. Now, what's really interesting about this is the sheer audacity of this step-by-step extraction plan. Dr. Harris would inject the boys with a cocktail of sedatives, essentially knocking them out cold. Next, they would actually bind the boys' hands behind their backs just to prevent them from ripping their masks off in case they happened to wake up. Then, they fitted them with tightly sealed, positive-pressure oxygen masks. And finally, they strapped these unconscious boys to the divers with a harness, essentially carrying them out like human duffel bags, navigating purely by feeling a thin guide rope in the dark. And the pressure to execute this insane plan, it was reaching a boiling point because of the weather. Meteorologists had just issued a dire warning. Massive monsoon rains were forecasted to hit hard by July 10th. If they didn't get those boys out before then, the cave would flood entirely, to the roof, permanently sealing them inside until winter. It was a literal, undeniable do-or-die deadline. So on July 8th, they pull the trigger and initiate this insanely complex, highly coordinated relay system. Phase 1 was entirely dependent on the elite British divers. They acted as the primary carriers, navigating the deadly, zero-visibility underwater sections to safely transport the sedated boys to a dry base camp known as Chamber 3. Then, once they hit Chamber 3, Phase 2 kicked in, a massive chain of medical support teams and soldiers who would constantly check the boys' vitals and then physically carry them on stretchers over the remaining treacherous rocky terrain all the way to the entrance. But listen to this. Even the best-laid plans face terrifying hurdles in the dark. During one of the extractions, diver Chris Jewell temporarily lost his grip on that essential guide rope. Floating there in complete and utter pitch blackness, unable to see a single inch in front of his face, he frantically felt around and grabbed what he thought was the rope. Turns out, it was actually an old electrical cable. He followed it, only to realize terrifying minutes later that he was swimming deeper into the cave, not out. Thankfully, he stopped, corrected his course, and miraculously found the lifeline again. And then, the climax of the rescue brought one final, heart-stopping gamble. On the very last day, they were extracting the smallest boy of the group. The problem? His face was just simply too small for the specialized, full-seal oxygen masks they had brought. Diver Jason Mallinson had to make a split-second life-or-death decision right then and there. With absolutely no time left and no other options, he used a mask that he knew wouldn't perfectly seal. He risked a leak, dove into those dark, murky waters, and just prayed it would hold long enough. And incredibly, amazingly, it held. On July 10th, exactly 18 agonizing days after this whole ordeal began, the final boy and the coach were brought up to the surface. Against every single odd, despite the massive oxygen depletion, the violently rising floods, and the totally unprecedented medical risks, all 13 members of the wild boars were successfully rescued. It stands as one of the most monumental testaments to human perseverance in modern history. Ultimately, this explainer highlights so much more than just a cave rescue. It highlights a genuine blueprint for global collaboration. When 13 lives were on the line, 17 different nations ignored their politics, dropped their borders, pooled their absolute brightest minds and bravest personnel together, and they achieved the seemingly impossible. And it leaves us with a pretty powerful question. What could humanity achieve if we applied this exact same relentless unity to our everyday global crises? Thanks so much for exploring this incredible story with me. Keep learning and stay curious.